Hey y'all, welcome to the third episode of the APAC Podcast. So as always, I'm LJ, your historian. I'm your host.
I'm Chris. I'm used to be a programming chair. Now I'm gone, but yeah, there we go.
I'm Lauren, pronoun she, her. I'm currently your APAC president.
I'm Sarah, pronoun she, her, hers. I am the current VP.
So tonight, lined up, thanks to Chris, we have Grace Newton, and she's gonna give her experiences of being an adoptee, and then we're just gonna go from there. So Chris, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, awesome. Hey Grace. Welcome to APAC. This is our usual. We usually have a cast of different people, but thanks for being here today. I know it's been crazy this year, but thanks for taking the time. So I just wanted to ask a couple of things. Can you just introduce yourself? Where do you work at? Is it Asian adoptee background? And I know you work with other Asian adoptees as well. So some things like that.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. Like you mentioned, my name is Grace Newton, and I'm currently a Master's of Social Work student at the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis. For school, I currently am a research fellow, and I'm looking at research on child maltreatment domestically, and so that's been really interesting. And my practicum experience last semester was with the Department of Social Services Children's Division, and so I have a lot of research and personal experience in the international adoption world, but it's been nice to get a lens into the domestic and public side of adoption as well. In terms of my international adoption experience, I was adopted from China when I was 3 years old. So I've got that lived experience of being an adoptee and being very involved in adoptee and adoption communities in my personal life. And then academically, I took a class when I was an undergrad at Macalester College on transracial and transnational adoption, and that class really was the catalyst that sparked my work in the community. And I also credit just the location of my college for a lot of my work because I was in Minnesota, which has the highest number of adoptees per capita in the US, and so I just had a lot of adoptees and interesting adoption work available to me. And then professionally, at my undergrad, I started the Transracial and Transnational Adoptee Identity Collective with some other students, and I've led some teen adoptee groups, and I am a part of KAN, the Korean Adoptee and Adoptive Family Network Conference. I sit on their advisory council right now. And then I also write about adoption and my experiences as an Asian American woman adoptee and the intersections of power, privilege, money, race in the adoption system on my blog, which is called Red Thread Broken. And so I sometimes write on some other blogs, and I've written in a couple of anthologies and sometimes talk to people like you.
Right. I actually read quite a lot of your blog onto Red and Broken, and because my friend had recommended me because I was looking for a speaker to come for the Adoptee month this month. And did that starting the blog was any particular reason, or did you follow the trend, or was there any particular reason for it?
Yeah, I started my blog in 2013, and I started it the summer after I had taken that class on adoption. I took the class on transracial and transnational adoption my first year of undergrad, and it was a really emotional experience for me. Academically, I just remember feeling very stretched because it really required a lot of critical thinking from an academic lens, but it was also critical thinking about the system that put together my family and my own experiences. And I think I'm on the older side of Chinese adoptees, and so growing up, I was oftentimes the mentor or older adoptee, and I didn't really have older adoptee mentors that I could look up to. And so that class was the first time that I had a relationship with an older adoptee, my professor. And I also, for the first time, really had a peer friend group of adoptees. And I think when that class ended and school let up for the semester, I really was still in the middle of processing all the information that I had been learning that semester. And I started my blog as a way to release some of my feelings, as well as continue learning, reading, processing adoption media and adoption content that I was seeing now in a new lens because of that class. And so I really started it for myself and never imagined that it would be seen by as many people as it has been. Or I guess, yeah, I don't know if I envisioned that nearly like 8 years later I would still be writing on it, but I am.
Yeah. I tried writing blog as like a journal too, and I stopped like after a month. I know how hard it is to actually continually writing, and I do it with my friends a lot, but I don't know, 8 years, that's a long time. I know the pandemic has probably changed everybody this year, 2020, but has anything changed from your work that you've been doing? I know a lot of times you do it over the internet, and we talked right before the podcast, you were that you've been doing almost similar to how it was for the conferences and how you advise that. Only thing is the conference is being virtual, but has anything changed to, like, let's say your school? I know you're a master's level, and your research and going on, or anything that you've been doing like actual, like outside of a house and doing all the work, has anything changed?
Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of my adoption advocacy has been on virtual platforms, either through my blog or other online channels. I think that, I have gone to several conferences in person to speak on panels, and so that's not happening right now during COVID, but I think that we all are getting more comfortable with this web technology and utilizing that more. My classes are, for the most part, online, and I know that next semester they will be entirely online. I think that my research, we'd been collecting data in person, and now we've also had to switch into the online world of focus groups, and there's like new barriers that way. But I think that, a lot has shifted. But like everyone, we're just trying to figure out how to adapt to the new situation that we find ourselves in.
Oh, absolutely. Because our school is starting to, we were thinking to go on campus earlier this semester, but then it quickly changed after like 2 weeks before we started. We went to going completely online, and spring semester is going to be online. So it has changed quite a lot. I'm going to go deep a little bit more into kind of like this year, how it has affected you. Earlier this year, before we started the semester, our APAC group, board members has talked about a lot about Asian hated speeches online and social media. That I have a personal experience with that. Like when I went to, because my parents are in the East Coast, and when we went there, like when I went to grocery store, I like called names, like wearing a mask and going around when pandemic first started. Do you have any stories, or how has that, like, have you tried like talk to other people, like what's your stand on that, like problem, let's say, has happened before? I don't know if it still is a problem, but it's kind of an underlying, I know it's not the center of attention right now, but
yeah, I think that it definitely isn't getting as much media attention as it did in the spring, but I think you're right. That doesn't mean that the issue has gone away. We still have a president who's using China virus and Kung flu I feel very lucky personally that in this past year since the pandemic started, I haven't had any direct encounters of like pandemic related microaggressions or experiences, but I think that because of the just like knowledge of this really heightened anti-Asian racism, I think I would say that I have just like a personal heightened level of like vigilance and just precaution when I do go outside. And I think for adoptees and Asian adoptees in particular, I'm really interested in seeing how the anti-Asian sentiment around the pandemic and is going to potentially influence identity development. I think a lot of white adoptive parents, I've talked to a lot of white adoptive parents who still subscribe to like a colorblind ideology and don't necessarily acknowledge their child's race. And I think that, that's a huge setback to an adoptee of color if they're not prepared to deal with racism that will happen to them. And so I think that that'll be really interesting in this group of like coming of age adoptees, how just this growing up in this experience of like just hearing about anti-Asian violence near daily during a certain time period will impact that. I also think that adoptees, because we grew up in white families and oftentimes white communities, tend to be very racially isolated, and we might not have people, friends, or family who understand when we go through these like microaggressions or racial experiences. And another thing that I've been thinking about with the pandemic is since adoptees have already lost one set of parents, just the visibility of the mortality globally and what that might do in terms of like increasing maybe anxiety or fear of losing their adoptive parents.
I guess going back to you saying how like this pandemic can like affect like the growing like identity that people form. Like, I guess like a personal anecdote that I would share is like when I would like bring food like to eat like at lunch, like my parents would say like don't bring that because that's stinky, right? So like even in that case, like I just wonder like how like that would turn out for like an adoptee, like like I guess it's like a coping mechanism or like survival skill to like try and fit in with the group. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that one approach to coping with all of the anti-Asian racism for some adoptees might be trying to like push that side of their identity away and like conform or just like fit into the white like normalcy of whatever setting they're in. Yeah, I definitely could see that.
Oh, for sure.
I just wonder, like, I even see it for my brother. He's like, me and my brother are not adopted, but like, even just like, I just can't kind of get my mind through how hard would it be for an adoptee, as like how you said, like forming their identity, because he is already having trouble like going like off from friends, and where we are still in the primary like white community where he goes to high school, and he meets like Asian friends in like church, or he goes to like play basketball with like all his Asian friends, but then he gets kind of pulled away because of this pandemic, right, out of that community, where he can talk to an adult or talk to his in Korean like older brother, right, and talk to, and then he's just at home, not doing like just with the family and just doing online classes. I can see that already him just getting anxiety, and yeah, pandemic has hit quite a lot, actually. I can definitely tell, and even seeing our APAC members, it's quite a lot. Yeah. Let's go with different. I don't know how to segue from that. Let's say, let's go into it.
Next question.
The next question going into it. We're cutting this, whatever. That's fine. Cutting this baseline. So because you talked about how the Asian adoptees, like they're growing up, Asian adoptees currently are getting affected with identity forming and staying in their parent, only in the house and not being able to go outside and all that stuff for the pandemic. I just want to kind of know how you developed your identity when you were growing up as an adoptee, and kind of segue to it a little more lighter now, right? So I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, that's like a really long story, but I think that I was adopted when I was 3, and so I had some basic Mandarin, like body parts and animals, and my dad had learned some Mandarin to communicate with me. And I think that my parents really did try to keep me as culturally connected as they knew how to. I grew up going to Saturday morning Chinese school, but I was from a like medium-sized Midwestern city where there really wasn't like a huge interest in Chinese school. So it was pretty rudimentary and would start at like ni hao, zai jian, like every year. So it was like no real progression. But I did get to see like other Chinese adopted kids and like Chinese faces there. And my parents, you know, they gave me like a hongbao, like a lucky envelope every Chinese New Year. And we went to culture camp in the fall every year for other Chinese adopted families. But I oftentimes really describe my initial racial identity as more of this like Pan-Asian identity, because it really was more of a self-taught one. My parents are white and they're of like Polish and Welsh ancestry, and you know, we would watch like documentaries or things about China. But I think when I was young, the few like Asian friends that I had, I would see like similarities and maybe some of the things that their families would do, and I would just tuck that in the back of my head as like, oh, like this must be an Asian thing. And so, you know, I accumulated these like Asian things. And then when I was in college, I was a Chinese major, an international studies major, and I was an Asian studies minor and an American studies minor. And I feel like really all of these majors and minors were just like my identity that I was like trying to figure out. And so I think that college was really formative because it was the first time where I was able to really dive into like my Chinese identity and Chinese history and film and writing. And but I think college was also really formative because I remember walking around Minneapolis, St. Paul, and feeling like a new level of vulnerability, because back home, you know, people knew me as my parents' daughter. They had some context for me, but when I was in this new city, no, there was no context. People just saw me as an Asian, I don't even know if they saw me as an Asian American person, as this Asian person. And they didn't know that I was like, oh, like, you know, I was like this adopted person, and I look Asian, but I really like felt a lot more white at first. And so I remember that really clearly. And I think, you know, yeah, I guess being in college, being away from my parents, being able to study Mandarin and Chinese and go to China for study abroad, I think that time period was what most solidified my racial identity.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for maybe somebody who's younger and is going through that process of trying to find their identity and who they are? Maybe they haven't hit college yet, so they can't take classes, or maybe their parents don't, I don't want to say help, but like maybe they don't encourage it. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that my advice would be to I guess, like, it's really not fair. But in that case, adoptees, like, we have to be proactive about culture keeping or learning. And I think that for a lot of people, for perhaps like children of immigrants, culture and where they fall in this like Asian American culture, it's more of this like opt-out process of like they've grown up in this like Asian household, and then they decide how much they want to like keep or opt out of. And for adoptees, it's much more of this opt-in process, and we have to really seek that out. So I would suggest for a younger person who maybe didn't know how to talk to their parents about wanting these aspects of their identity, or doesn't know where to turn, I would say something even as basic as like language apps on your phone as like a basic way of starting that language process. There are some, where you can like chat with people, native speakers. There are some where you can just like word of the day, and for some people that might be enough. I think that there are also a lot of really good adoptee communities online on Facebook groups. There's Subtle Asian Adoptee Traits, China's Children International. There's a big cohort of adoptees on Twitter, and then blogs like mine and others that have been around for even longer. I think that that like starting to look at those groups or blogs might also be a really good entry point into like discovering Asian American identity or adoptee identity. And I think there are a lot of good like book recommendations and film recommendations and things that happen in those spaces.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, when there is I'm sure everybody has trouble with their parents, but it's hard, I feel like, for an adoptee to bring up a problem to their parents more, because they are brought into different identified parents, so not their birth parents. So I think there's some kind of disconnect, right? I feel I've read a lot of books onto it because my friend is an Asian adoptee, and he's been dealing with a lot of with his parents, going through college and actually working, getting out of the house and all that stuff. But there's a lot of books about parenting. I read countless things about parenting, but what could a kid, like let's say adoptee kid, can do to, I guess, smoothly bring up a problem, or how would they face that problem with the parents and like interact with them more rather than arguing over, because arguing is never an answer, right? So
yeah. Oh, this is really tricky. I think you're right. There is a level of disconnect, I think, with predominantly white adoptive parents, and when they adopt like children of color, and just obviously that understanding that a person of color, child of color, they will experience the world differently than their white adoptive parents. And as much as adoptive parents love their children, there are some things about their identity and their experiences they will just never be able to fully understand. And I think that can be hurtful to parents. And I think another major challenge for adoptees is this expectation that society puts on adoptees that we are supposed to be grateful. And a lot of adoptive parents have that mentality as well, that like they have perhaps rescued their child from a third world country, and so it puts this other level of like uneven power into that relationship that might make those like negative feelings or instances of racism like harder to bring up if someone knows that their parents are just have a mindset that's like you should just be happy that you're here. And so I think that for an adoptee who wants to bring up an issue with the parent. I think that
It's okay. Take your time.
yeah,
It's a hard question. It's a really hard question. I have a friend who is adopted, and he found out he was adopted like when he was 19, when he went to college. And that was a huge, like as soon as that happened, when he had a hard time bringing a problem, and he's still figuring it out how he's going to talk about how he's going to pay for his dorm. And I try to even help him, but it's hard. It's a hard question. So it's okay.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that you're being a supportive friend to this person, and maybe that's a piece of advice I would offer is it can be really hard to have these conversations, especially when you know that they might not go well. So if there's a, say, friend or family member that an adoptee could practice some of what they want to say, that might be a suggestion. I think another might be, I think like when when you've got a lot of feelings, sometimes you just want to like release, but that doesn't always translate into understanding or empathy from the person that you were trying to get that from. And so it can be really frustrating. It can feel really slow, I think, to take a more like maybe educational path. And it really, it shouldn't be the burden of like people of color or adoptees or whoever, like whatever the marginalized identity is. But I think that one way that that might be more digestible if a parent seems very resistant is just like a slow introduction to maybe some of these like thought-provoking blog posts or other like types of media that maybe are gently worded but might just like plant a little seed of like there's more to it than just this one-sided happy narrative.
Right. I just think that interacting with your parents and like especially arguing over some kind of problem is always difficult, even if who you are, right? Just confronting your parents is just a hard task to do. But I don't know how it would feel, right? I'm not an adoptee, so like that confronting your parents there's a disconnect, and you're not like that. Your parents is not your birth parents, and that they don't, especially if they don't understand your culture, right? That's very difficult. I wanted to ask, what are some resources would a young teenager or college student like us can look at to maybe get a supportive community that is supporting other Asian adoptees having problems, or that we can help other Asian adoptees, let's say if they're looking for somebody to listen to or things like that, because everybody needs somebody to listen to, right? Because you want to just rant out all your problems, because you can't do that all the time.
Yeah, I think that like I mentioned earlier, I would really recommend joining like some Facebook groups, the Subtle Asian Adoptee Traits, China Children International. That's like if you're a Chinese adoptee. I think, there's a Facebook group, Transracial Adoption and Transracial Adoption Perspectives. There are a lot of really good books. A recent-ish memoir is Nicole Chung's All You Can Ever Know. She's a Korean adoptee. So yeah, I would really look for adoptee authored books and literature. I think Jane Jiang Trenka's The Language of Blood was one that I read when I was in that class. And then there's also an anthology called Outsiders Within, which is edited by Jane Jiang Trenka, and that's a pretty seminal piece in adoption literature. I can like send you some of the resources that I recommend that I have on my blog later. There are a lot, but there are a lot of adoptees on Instagram, Twitter, all of these things, but you have to like search adoptee type hashtags or things to bring them up, because the dominant adoption like media is the like adoptive parents and adoption agencies.
For
I
sure.
mean,
And
yeah.
those oh yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, LJ. Go ahead.
So Grace's like information or like things that she will send will be in the description below if on YouTube, or it's going to be in the description for Spotify. So take a look at that if you guys are interested. Chris?
Oh yeah, I was just like, because like social media, I don't even use social media, but I know social media is very, very useful. I know I've seen some of the Instagram posts that we've been putting on for like podcasts and all this stuff, and they actually recommended more into more different adoptee speakers saying like the quotes or the YouTube videos, and I would really recommend like reading those, because while I was talking with Catherine, like Grace, she gave me a bunch of other resources as well, and I'm definitely gonna look into it. More you dig into this topic, I think you learn more, and not just about adoptees. I think you understand just more about different aspects that people have a confusion over identities, right? That it's not this like sure like that problems we say for like adoptees are having that disconnect with the parents, but I feel like anybody could feel that as well. Like there at some point of your time in teenager or older adults or younger adult times that you might feel that disconnect into family, siblings or anything. And I'm sure it's another level with adoptees, but I just wanted to kind of go into people who are not adoptees in the community. So I know we talked about earlier, I don't know if we actually talked about while we were recording, but because I get confused because we were talking before LJ came in, but I know a lot of your work is online and you've been doing it. Did I ask this during the podcast we were recording?
The pandemic kind of. Or
I was gonna ask like what she does outside like right now during the pandemic as like to bring more people to it. Did I already say it?
No, we can go into that, yeah, because we were mostly focusing on about like school for grades. But definitely, like, continue, Chris. You can. That's good.
Oh man, that's there's a lot of questions.
What I'm doing to stay occupied in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, school keeps me pretty occupied, but
As everyone, yeah.
I do enjoy painting.
Yay!
And it's been a really lovely fall. So my roommate and I have taken a lot of after school walks, and that's kind of our transition to like we're finishing school in our apartment and now we are transitioning to homework time in our apartment. We cook a lot, my roommate and I really like that. And what else am I doing in this time? I would say school work, my research fellowship, and then my practicum this semester is with a child, like a children's grief agency, working with kids and their families who have lost someone. And so, that keeps me safe.
I know as a master's student, you're like, well, you're really busy, right? I mean, it's a master's student. I've been through master's school as well. So working with the child agency and things, did you just start master's school, or is this like, you were doing it before the pandemic started, or?
Yeah, so this is my second year of my MSW and I'll graduate in May.
Okay. So like how, it's kind of off topic, but I'm just curious. But how has that changed since? Because like I know you said you're getting more data from like virtually and getting it from that, but that is like working with a child agency, a grief agency. Is that like also getting a data, or is it a completely different work that you're doing for a master's?
Yeah, so there I'm doing like bereavement groups with children over Zoom, which is not ideal. But I was with the Children's Division, Social Services, Child Protective Services last semester, and that was in person for the first half and then online the second half. And so I did have some idea of like what normalcy would be there. But I entered this practicum position in the midst of the pandemic. And so all of my work here has been virtual. But yeah, for the Children's Grief Organization, I'm leading like bereavement groups for children and an adult one as well. I'm part of like a high school group, and then I also do some like anticipatory grief visits with children who whose parent has a terminal diagnosis, and so just kind of preparing them with coping skills. And
so end of the school, like let's say when you finish your master's, are you thinking to kind of combine how you're working, like social working, and the where you work outside of the school, and like being getting more information about Asian adoptees and their resources and cultures? Are you trying to combine that into kind of work in that field, or are you trying to think completely different? Because maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I feel really lucky in that I've been able to embed adoption into most of my coursework through papers or projects. And I think that part of my rationale for my practicum experience at this child grief agency is that I think, so children's grief when someone dies is oftentimes disenfranchised, and then adoptees, their grief and loss over their first parents, culture, language, all of those losses that are inherent with adoption are also, I would say, disenfranchised and stigmatized. And so I think that understanding how children grieve the loss of a parent is really part of my advocacy work in preventing unnecessary losses of parents for children through adoption. And so my long-term goal, I think that I'll probably work in the field for a couple of years, and then my goal is to go back for a PhD in social work and really delve deeper into these issues of like the adoption system, global deinstitutionalization, adoptee identity development.
Absolutely. How long do we have until we finish? I'm just checking the clock because I wanted to ask one question like before we end everything. Was it like I know we talked quite a lot, but to the audience, let's say if there's one thing that you would like to tell, like say something about this topic, like that is one thing that you want them to understand and learn about after listening to this podcast, can you just shortly, briefly talk about it?
I think my one thing about adoption is that it's complicated. The media, the like adoption agencies, society likes to paint this image of adoption as this like triple win-win-win situation where birth parents who are struggling win because they don't have to raise this child. Adoptive parents who can't conceive or want to have a child win because they get a child that's theirs, and then adoptees win because we oftentimes in international adoptions we move from like developing countries to affluent countries, and we gain a family, and it's just people tend to stop thinking right there. But adoption also necessitates a lot of loss. And for a family to be created through adoption, one has to be broken first. And I think that we also have to look at what it means for families to be so desperate that they feel their option is adoption or not raising their children. We know that in orphanage in orphanages around the world, over 80% of the children there have one living parent, and it's poverty that is the leading cause of children being in orphanages, not a lack of desire of parenting. And I think adoption can be a good thing, can be a wonderful thing, but for these like 80% of these children in these institutions, like what would it look like if instead of pouring all of this money into adopting one child, how far could that money go in supporting those families and staying together? And I think my fundamental belief is just that poverty should never be a reason to separate a family.
That's awesome.
Good, everybody.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Does anybody have a question? Because I did like cut in really fast and like try not to keep the audio spaced out. I know, Sarah, you asked a question. LJ and Lauren, if you have anything before you end.
Oh, should I not ask a question then?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. It was just like, I was just like asking people.
Okay. So we were briefly talking about like family dynamic and the win-win-win situation. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, if this is too personal, but how do you feel about adopting in the future? Like, do you want to adopt, or do you feel obligated to adopt, or yes?
Okay. I think, when I was growing up, I thought that I would have biological children and that I would adopt. And I think, I was adopted. Adoption was something that was just normalized to me. But as I learn more and more about just the power imbalances in the adoption system, I think that at this point, I could not ethically adopt a child internationally, at least. I think that on the one hand, adoptees might be the best positioned to raise adoptees, but I think that adoptees who do choose to adopt and who are involved in the adoptee community and have an awareness of just all of the complicated aspects of the adoption system really have to be prepared to answer to their child, like why they chose to engage in this process, if they knew how much corruption was a part of it, if they knew how much loss and identity fragmentation and grief were a part of it. And so I think that it's obviously a very, very personal choice to each individual, but at this point in my life, I don't see myself adopting, but it was something that I had considered at one point.
I kind of thought that I was adopted, and I also am struggling with that because people will ask me that exact same question, like, "Oh, since you're adopted, like, are you going to adopt yourself?" And I haven't heard that perspective before. I haven't honestly looked too much into the adoption process and like what corruptions there could be, but thank you for bringing that to light because I did not think of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that each country has, there was the Hunan scandal in China from 2004, and I know that a lot of Latin America has shut down. Vietnam had shut down at one point for corruption, and then they opened up again in 2015. Ethiopia has closed their adoption program, and I just feel like when the same issues of corruption, trafficking, exploitation happen around the world in each of these different locations, it's not a country-specific problem. It's a problem with the way the whole system is operating. Mm-hmm. And so, my opinion, there needs to be a big overhaul. But yeah, I think it's complicated. It's adoption. It's complicated. I saw your last name, and I was wondering if you were an adoptee.
Yes. Yes.
At one point in college, I had created this list of the telltale signs someone's adopted, and they have a white last name. But of course, I'm getting to an age now where people, are getting married, so it could be a married name. But
Oh, no.
They're like Chinese and in an elementary Chinese class. If they're Chinese and Jewish, that's like one of my signs.
Yeah, no, it's very, people look at me and they're like, oh, you have two last names. And I feel almost obligated to be like, I was adopted, like, I don't know. Like, I mean, maybe I should just be like, oh, that's just how it is. But for some reason in me, I feel like I need to explain myself. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I would encourage you to think about that. I think I definitely resonate. I think that for me, like, I really can't explain my identity without including that I'm adopted. You know, I'm Asian American, but like my adoption colors that Asian American experience for me. But I also realize, you know, adoption is like, it's also a very intimate detail of my life. Like, when someone finds out I'm adopted, they find out a lot of other things at the same time. And so it's something that like not everyone needs to know. And I think for me, when I like determine when I'm going to tell people I'm adopted, I kind of use is this person going to be in my life for a long time? Does this person actually care about me? Or is this person just like someone curious in the aisle at the grocery store? And then I've learned to feel okay leaving people like feeling awkward and confused.
No, definitely, because it's like a piece of yourself that like you have to like selectively like give to a person. So that's definitely understandable.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So with that, anyone else have any other questions before we wrap this up? All right, well, let's give a hand of applause for Grace, being our first speaker on the podcast. Grace, did you have anything you want to promote besides like the resources that you told us about? We'll definitely put it in the description. It'll be on Spotify. So
I also really I noticed on your Instagram that you had called it, and earlier in the recording as well, you called it National Adoptee Month, and I really appreciate that because you know, I think that adoptees, we really are trying to take back this month, which is like, yeah. So thank you for that.
definitely. So as always, I've been your host, LJ Galdo. I am your historian. He, him, his, my pronouns.
I'm Chris. He is former programming chair. I'm going to be gone after this, but yeah.
Lauren, she, her.
And Sarah, she, her.
Oh, for sure. This is gonna be a little difficult because Christine and Janelle are not here, but follow us on the socials, APAC Ilstu, Snapchat, Instagram. Group me, you can probably just message one of us. We'll definitely get that to you. So yeah, this is the end of this podcast. So see you guys.